What's up, Grandmaster Igor Smirnov is here, and today I'm extremely pleased to share with you the new opening line, which is the bishop's opening. It happens after the first moves pawn to e4, e5, and there goes bishop to c4. It is not the mainstream line, it is way less popular compared to the mainstream move knight to f3 or maybe knight to c3, the endgame, but nevertheless bishop c4 is perfectly sound. You're developing a piece, you're also taking aim at the black's weakest square f7, and from there you can obviously attack an opponent's king. Also, after bishop c4, you drag your opponent out of his opening knowledge, and therefore you can surprise your opponent. And finally, there are a lot of really interesting attacking aggressive lines that you can follow up here with this bishop's opening, which I'm gonna share with you in this video. So get ready, grab a cup of coffee or tea or whatever you love, and let me show you some really interesting opening lines that you can use in your next games. We'll take a look at all the main continuations for black here, and let's start with the move bishop to c5. If, let's say, black is unsure how to react and he or she just plays the similar move with their bishop. And right here you have a really surprising move pawn to d4, which starts fighting for initiative right away. What's the point of this sacrifice of your pawn? In case black captures with the pawn, which is actually a mistake, but it's not that easy to figure it out for black, you have the really cool sacrifice bishop takes h7 check, and on the next move you go queen h5 and you take the bishop back. After black covers the king, you take the bishop back, and as a result of this operation you weaken the opponent's king, which is currently exposed, and therefore you'll have great chance of attacking it in the future. Right now the pawn on d4 is also attacked, and all in all black is already in some trouble here. For example, if they go knight to c6, you can play knight f3, pressuring the pawn once again, and if black goes d6, after here, I mean, there are different things that white can play. Queen c4, possibly the best move, but you can go queen d5, which is a little bit tricky, because if black goes bishop e6, covering the king, you go knight g5 with a double attack to the opponent's king and the bishop, and you're just winning the game right away. Of course, black does not have to play that badly, but regardless, you know, the black's position is already compromised in this line, and yeah, it's just an incorrect way of playing for black. Alright, let's go once again into the bishop's opening, and we have just analyzed the move bishop c5. Here we go pawn to d4, attacking the bishop and the pawn. We just analyzed the line pawn takes d4, which turns out to be a mistake for black. Now let's take a look at the best response for black. Bishop takes d4. Now you go knight f3, attacking the bishop. Black supports it by going knight to c6, and here you castle. Why don't you take the bishop right away? The thing is, you're waiting actually for the best moment to do so, because here, first of all, you have one idea is to capture the bishop. One more idea is to jump with the knight to g5, and then, with the support of the bishop, you start hitting that f7 square. Therefore, you have two eventual threats, and you're just waiting for the best one to execute. And in case black goes knight to f6, which is probably the best continuation, the main continuation, right now it's the really good time to capture the bishop, because if black captures with the pawn, you can now attack that f6 knight by pushing your pawn forward. And black is kind of experiencing some troubles here. It's, as you can see, this bishop opening is really not that easy for black to handle, because there are a lot of pitfalls here, and if black just plays one incorrect move, he can be in trouble, you know, very, very quickly. Let's see what's the point. First of all, black certainly can't capture the pawn, because there you just go rook to e1, beating the knight, and on the next move, let's say pawn goes to d6, you just go pawn to f4, and you grab the knight on the next move. It can't go away because of the king, which stands behind it. So that is just losing. Let's take a few moves back. Therefore, black can't capture the pawn, and otherwise they have to move the knight away, and moving it back to g8 it is a very sad option. And if black goes knight to e4, then you continue with queen to g4, and once again you're actually winning here, because you're attacking the knight as well as the pawn g7. From there you'll attack the rook as well, the f7 pawn, and once again black is in trouble. Let's take a few moves back and see if there is any way for black to stay in the game, because there must be some way, right? It shouldn't be so bad for black in all the lines. At this point, when you capture the bishop, the correct response for black is recapturing with the knight. And after that, it's more complicated for white to unleash your attack, but you can still do that by playing pawn to f4. Remember, you sacrifice the pawn, therefore you gotta play more aggressively, and here you're opening up the lines for your bishops, as well as the diagonal of the line for your rook as well, and here you start pressurizing the central construction, the pawn and the knight of black. Therefore, black needs to protect it, and after that, you open up the line for your rook, and you go bishop g5, and putting the pin on black's queen. And here, it's already fairly clear that you have some initiative for the pawn sacrificed. For example, black goes castling, and you can go knight to c3. You can also develop your knight to d2, or let's say even a3, saving the c3 option for the future so you can kick the knight away. But knight c3 also makes sense, because the knight aims to the d5 square to strengthen your pressure over the d5, over the f6 knight. And here, if let's say black goes bishop e6 to develop a piece as well as to cover that square, there's a really cool thing you can do. You can go knight to d5, and at first black is happy because he just prepared to grab the knight, but all of a sudden you're recaptured by the pawn, and you just switch to another attacking idea. Right now, currently, this knight from d4 has no way to escape from there, and white is ready to place pawn to c3 and simply win the knight, because the pawn from d5 does a good job of controlling all the squares where the black's d4 knight could eventually retreat to, and so it really puzzles black quite significantly. For example, if black plays queen to d6, trying to also maybe attack your bishop from c5, and also removing the queen from the pin, you can once again switch over to another threat, and now you can finally take on f6, doubling black's pawn and weakening black's pawn structure there, and after that you go bishop d3. So you switch over to the most straightforward idea of attacking the black's king. Now the bishop is aiming to the h7 square, your queen is ready to jump somewhere there to h5 and just to checkmate black. And again, black is in trouble in a real practical game. It's super difficult for black to find the right continuations here. For example, if black just captures the pawn, which is wrong, you go c3, pushing the knight away, and when it goes away, you have the discovered attack by bishop takes h7, followed by queen takes d5, winning the game. Once again, we're in the starting position of the bishop's opening. We just analyzed all the possible continuations, well, at least the most natural ones after black goes bishop to c5, and now let's analyze another common move, knight to c6. In this case, there is also something interesting that you can do. You can go knight to c3, and at this point you're delaying development of your knight from g1. You don't play knight f3 right away, because you want to save the option for you to push your pawn firstly to f4, which will allow you to have a more aggressive setup and to start expanding on the king side, in the early stage of the game. For example, if black goes something like knight f6, you go pawn to d3, once again you delay development of your knight, and you wait for the suitable moment, and if possible you'll push that pawn forward. Let's say if black goes something like d6 or any other move, you can actually play pawn to f4, and after that you play knight to f3 and you finalize your development. But now you can see that thanks to this pawn f4, it actually helps you to have a much more aggressive setup. So from here, it helps your rook to become active along the f line. Also, the pawn potentially can be pushed to f5 to gain more space there, or you can always trade off the pawns on e5 and just open more lines for your pieces and start attacking the opponent's king. All in all, here you have quite a promising position. For example, if black goes bishop g4, pinning your knight, you just kick it away immediately by playing pawn to h3, and that's not a problem for you at all. The bishop actually cannot go back, and again, this f4 pawn is doing a really great job for you here, because you can go pawn to g4, and after that, just capture that bishop with the support of your pawn. Therefore, this option is not suitable for black, and in case black captures your knight here on f3, you just recapture, and after that, if black goes knight to d4, it's not a problem, it's just a one-time attack and move, you retreat temporarily, and then on the next move after black plays something, you go bishop e3, you kick this knight away, you have two bishops, you have this strong center, and you have some pressure along the these diagonal, as well as along the f-file against the black's king, and all in all, you definitely have some advantage here. There we go with the one last option that black can choose in case black goes knight to c6. Here we discussed that white should delay development of his knight to save the option for pushing the pawn forward. Let's say black goes knight f6, pawn to d3, and here we discussed that in many situations you can actually push the pawn forward and only then develop your knight, which gives you a more aggressive attacking position. But there is one little bit of a problem here. If in case black goes bishop to c5, where the bishop looks at this diagonal, then playing f4 becomes slightly risky for white. It's not bad at all, and you can definitely play for this, you can go for this line, but in this case I would just say that you should be prepared a little bit better. You need to know the following variations, because sometimes you can get in trouble, if you're not sure how to deal with it, you can get confused and even lose the game. So either you need to just spend a little bit more time and, check this position with the computer so that you know how to react, or if you don't want to dive into this complexity, then you can choose a simpler option. Instead of playing pawn to f4, you can go for bishop g5, which is another way for you to put some pressure on black's position. You set the pin here, which can always be strengthened by putting your knight to d5 in the future to put some more pressure on the knight to f6. And here you're kind of taking advantage of the fact that the black's bishop went to c5, therefore black did not put it to e7. And from e7, the bishop could have possibly, neutralized the spin, but because black already developed the bishop to another square, you can take advantage of this and play bishop g5 right away. A lot of players are actually getting nervous when you have this spin, and you can really make use of it. For example, after knight f3, d6, you can go knight to d5, and actually black is in some sort of trouble. You can always capture that knight on f6, destroy the black's pawn structure around black's king, and after that, continue your attack over the opponent's king. In reality, to be exactly honest and objective, all these ideas with bishop g5 are not really dangerous for black, but the thing is, most players, they just don't know how to react and how to deal with it, and that's why they'll just get nervous and will probably play bad moves and will lose the game. By the way, in case you want to know how to deal with your opponent playing this move bishop to g5, you can take a look at the video which I recorded called Breaking Stereotypes, where I break down why this kind of a pin is really not dangerous, in case you know how to deal with it, and I explain there everything in details. But because it's a separate subject, it's not the bishop's opening in particular, I just link to that video below, and maybe I'll show it on the screen as well, and you can watch that video to know how to deal with it. Alright, anyway, just to finalize with this variation, again, most of your opponents are unaware how to deal with the pin, and you can put them in trouble by following this line. And now let's take a look at the last and the main response of black, the move knight to f6. This way, black not only develops knight, but also attacks your pawn on e4, and therefore it's the most aggressive way of playing for black. What do you do here? Of course, the main move here would be knight to c3, the most natural thing to do, or maybe pawn to d3. But I want to suggest to you another line, which is more aggressive and more unknown, therefore you can surprise and confuse your opponent. You can play pawn to d4, which is the more aggressive way of playing for you, because you start counter-attacking instead of defending your pawn. What can black possibly play here? In case black captures the pawn, which is one of the really natural responses, no, let's actually start with knight takes c4 first, because it's shorter, and after that we'll go into pawn captures d4. In case black captures the pawn on e4, which is actually a mistake, white captures the pawn on e5, and all of a sudden black is in trouble, even though it seems like, you know, it's just only a few moves well played so far, and it seems like black played all the classical moves, but somehow black is already in trouble. Because this knight from e4 has no good squares to retreat to, because these d6 and f6 squares are under the control of your pawn. And also you can attack black if, let's say, black goes something like knight to c6. Alright, then you have bishop takes f7, little combination. It's not really the sacrifice, because after king takes you go queen d5, check, and you take back the knight right away. This way you won that pawn on f7, black's king is exposed, it can't castle anymore, and you just got serious advantage here. Let me take a few moves back. What else can black possibly play? Let's say black goes pawn to d6, alright, trying to develop this way. Then you just go queen d5 right away, attacking the pawn as well as the knight, and once again you're, I think, just winning. So as you can see, it's actually pretty difficult for black already to deal with this variation, and therefore taking that pawn on e4 is probably a bad option for black, but again, a lot of your opponents will definitely go for it. Now let's go for the main line, the last line that you need to be aware of before you're perfectly ready to play the bishop's opening, which is pawn takes d4. The move that I suggest you to play here is knight to f3, more of in the gambit style, because yeah, if you take the pawn right away, black can win the tempo by going knight to c6, and that's not what you want. So you can go knight to f3, and from here, you save the option to recapture the pawn by your knight. But of course the question is, what if black captures your pawn? You left it unprotected. In this case, you capture the pawn with a queen, because now, not black, but you win a tempo by attacking the black's knight. From here, there are two moves that black can play, knight f6 or knight d6, and knight d6 may seem like the way for black to win the tempo back by attacking your bishop, hoping that you will move the bishop away. But here is actually a pretty big mistake, because you can castle, and all of a sudden black is in trouble because you can attack the black's king right away, straightforwardly, across the e line. For example, if black captures the bishop, you go rook e1 check, and after bishop e7, instead of recapturing the knight, you actually capture the pawn on g7, and you're just winning. You're attacking the rook, the only way to save the rook is to move it to f8, and after that you go bishop h6, creating a deadly threat of queen takes f8 with checkmate, and winning the rook as well. Notice that the black's bishop cannot recapture your queen because it is pinned. Therefore, queen takes f8 is a deadly threat, and actually there is no good way for black to deal with it, so here you're just winning. As you can see, it's a really tricky opening, and even though initially bishop c4 seems like just a development move, but there are a lot of traps here and there, and black should be extremely careful. Alright, now the final line that you gotta be aware of, just like we discussed, if black goes knight f6, the main line, you go pawn to d4, surprising your opponent, and then after pawn captures, you go knight f3, knight c4, queen takes d4. We just analyzed the line knight to d6, and there we realized that black is in a big trouble, because if his king gets exposed. But what if black goes knight f6, which is the correct continuation? In this case, you just continue your development. You go knight c3, if black goes knight c6, attacking your queen, it's not a big deal, you just retreat. And after that, let's say black goes something like bishop c5, you go bishop g5, put in this pin. We already analyzed that in one of the previous lines, that this pin could be unpleasant for black. And then after black castles, you castle alongside as well, because here, not only you put your king to safety, but you also activate your rook, and it's extremely active along the d-file, and it is ready actually to take part in the game. And even though you sacrifice the pawn, but you can see that you're ahead in development, you have a lot of open lines and diagonals for your pieces, and therefore it's definitely worth the sacrifice in a practical game. It's much easier to play such a position as white rather than as black, because you're just gonna probably take advantage of this pin and attack the black's king, and for black it's much harder to find the right moves here. For example, in case black goes pawn to d6, preparing development, then you go knight e4, and probably your opponent will already be significantly confused here, because the knight is pinned, and the knight from e4 is threatening to either capture the knight or to capture the bishop, and either way, you know, it's something unpleasant for black. Let's take a move back. In case black tries to neutralize this pin and plays pawn to h6, instead of retreating with the bishop, you have a really cool combination here, starting with bishop takes h6, all of a sudden, and then you go queen g6 check. It's really cool to execute a thing like that in a real game, not just in some tactical drill where you find the winning continuation. Here, because the pawn is pinned, black's king actually has to go to h8, then you capture the pawn, the knight covers the king, and from here you can continue your attack in different ways. The best way possibly is to go knight to e4, aiming to jump with one of your knights to g5, and after that checkmating opponent's king. Along the way, this knight is also taking black's bishop on c5, and you're just waiting actually. In case black tries to cover that g5 square with the bishop, you just play pawn to h4, preparing that move anyway, and even if black tries to cover it once again, you just jump there despite of anything, and on the next move, black is finally totally defenseless. Now, with the thanks to opening of the h-file, your rook starts coming into play, and on the next move you just capture the knight with your queen, and it is game over. That's it. I hope you enjoyed this new opening weapon that you can use. It's really tricky, and at the same time, it is solid. You're not compromising your position in any way. In case you have any questions, drop them in the comments down below, and I'll try to answer them as much as I can.